No bills have been introduced. The House comes to questions for oral answer. First question in the name of the Honourable Phil Heatley.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Phil Heatley.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what measures is the government taking to help control inflation for New Zealand families?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, among a number of sensible economic measures, the government has maintained practical and predictable monetary policy in the hands of an independent Reserve Bank, and this assists to control the cost of living. Among the policies, the government is working hard to get back to surplus this year and ensure existing spending is focused on programs that make a real difference to New Zealanders rather than going on a large spend-up which puts pressure on the interest rates and the cost of living. We're supporting businesses to invest and create jobs, and incomes are rising faster than inflation. Consumer prices rose 1.6% in the year to June 30, and food prices were up 1.2% for the year. That compares to overall inflation of 5.1% in 2008, when annual food prices jumped by 11% rather than 1.2%.
Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Honourable Phil Heatley.
To the Minister, how did consumer price inflation for the last June year compare with market expectations, and what were the main components of that annual result?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the quarterly CPI increase of 0.3% and the annual rise of 1.6% was slightly below market expectations. Annual inflation remains in the lower half of the Reserve Bank's 1 to 3% target zone, which is good news for households and businesses. In the June year, the strong exchange rate was reflected in lower prices for audiovisual and computing equipment, lower vehicle prices, and a fall in prices for telecommunication services. These falls were offset by slightly higher prices for housing and household utility prices, and increased costs for cigarettes and tobacco after an excise duty increase in January.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is he aware that Consumer Price Index inflation does not incorporate interest rate increases, therefore hiding the significant increases to mortgage rates that have occurred over the past year because of his government's failure in Auckland housing policy?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't think any interest rates increases have been hidden. People have been getting notifications in the mail for the last 3 or 4 months about their interest rates going up. But I would point out to the member that at 3.5%, the OCR is less than half what it was when his government left office in 2008, when it reached a record 8.25%. So the interest rate he's claiming is too high is 3.5%. When he was in charge, it reached 8.25%.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Honourable Phil Heatley.
What recent reports has he received on likely future trends in the cost of living?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in its review of the official cash rate this morning, the Reserve Bank said that overall inflation remains moderate, but strong growth in output has been absorbing spare capacity. Its independent decision to raise the OCR to 3.5% is expected to keep future average inflation near the 2% target and ensure that the economic expansion can be sustained. I'm sure the House understands just how significant the Reserve Bank statements are. With the OCR at 3.5%, the Reserve Bank is indicating that we can sustain growth around 3%. That's a sharp contrast to the interest rate structure under the previous Labor government, where the OCR never fell below 4.75% in 9 years. And when they left, it was at 8.25%. Inflation was above 5%, and floating mortgage interest rates were almost 11%, and house prices had doubled in the previous 7 years. It looks like we'll be able to avoid all of those mistakes this time round.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If the Minister compares interest rates with the USA, China, Japan, UK and nearly all of Europe, is it not a fact that comparatively we are paying the highest interest rates in 50 years?
Honourable Bill
New
English.
Zealand is paying the lowest interest rates it's had in 50 years, or just slightly above. And of course, if the member wants long-term recession and enormous government debt, like they have in the UK and Europe, then of course we'll have 0 to 1% interest rates. But actually this government chooses more jobs, more investment and more growth, and that is why we have higher interest rates than they do.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Honourable Phil Heatley.
To the Minister, what reports has he seen on alternative approaches to monetary policy and economic management, and what impact would they have on the cost of living for New Zealand families?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, we've just seen one alternative approach from the Leader of New Zealand First, who's suggesting that we have large deficits, enormous government debt and low growth rates, and therefore we'll have low interest rates.
Point of order.
Order.
Mr Speaker, that is...
Order.
That
Right,
is
Honourable
out
Winston.
of order. He cannot say that and speak for another party, particularly one that knows what it's doing.
Yeah. Order. The Right Honourable Winston Peters raises a reasonable point. Is it inappropriate for any member to raise a question that's simply a means of attacking another party? Does the Minister want to add further to the answer?
Well, of course I do, Mr.
Well,
Speaker.
the Minister can, but it better not be attack on another political party.
Mr Speaker, well, I've seen reports that from parties who are worried about the cost of living that they're going to put a $25 carbon tax on, which of course will raise the cost of living, not lower it.
Question number 2, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all his statements?
Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
on behalf of the Prime Minister, yes.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Does he stand by his statement that, quotes, "My style is to be open and transparent"? If so, why won't he be open and transparent